The Expendables 4 is the latest entry in a franchise that has simultaneously gone on for too long and never really reached its full potential. Let's discuss.
I watch so you don't have to.
Before I get started, I'd like to kindly ask that you hit the like button and please subscribe to the channel for more content just like this.
Come on. Do it! Do it!
The official synopsis on Google for The Expendables 4 reads, armed with every weapon they can get their hands on, the Expendables are the world's last line of defense and the team that gets called when all other options are off the table. This movie is so lazy that they didn't even bother to differentiate the synopsis on Google from all of the other Expendable movies. I guess if you actually watched the movie, you would understand why they didn't write a fresh synopsis, because there's not much of a story to speak of.
We ain't found
As I was watching this movie, I was struggling to figure out what exactly was the inspiration for making it in the first place. I'm going to go out on a limb here and make a proclamation that the Expendables franchise as a whole is one of the biggest what-ifs in cinematic history. If you just look at the concept alone that all of this was based on, a concept in which this movie abandons, by the way.
Why?
The original idea was to bring all of these iconic 80s and 90s action heroes together in one film, while also paying homage to all the films that we know and love from them. And at first, the Expendables, at the very least, had the big names. They had Schwarzenegger, they had Stallone, they had Bruce Willis. So the novelty of seeing those guys on screen together was just enough to get me somewhat interested in those early movies, even if those movies lacked the genuine charm of the action movies they were trying to emulate.
He's out of line, but he's right.
But if we are being honest with ourselves, these movies never really made good use of those big name actors. Even though I found some enjoyment in those first two movies on a very basic level, it always felt like they were never as good or as badass as they should have been. And I think that pretty much comes down to absolutely dreadful writing and direction.
Put some effort into it!
I remember there were rumors, probably in the early 2000s, that Quentin Tarantino was making a film called Inglourious Basterds. And he was at least kicking around the idea of casting Schwarzenegger, Stallone, and Bruce Willis in that film. His goal, presumably, would be to restore those actors to their former 1980s badassery, and also pay homage to the classic Men on a Mission films that inspired Quentin Tarantino. Now imagine for a second an Expendables-like concept written and directed by Quentin Tarantino.
Shut up and take my money!
We almost got something similar to that, and that would have been the movies that us fans wanted and deserved. Of course, Inglourious Basterds evolved and ended up being a completely different movie and frankly a better movie. And Stallone, on the other hand, would go on to create The Expendables using that concept, and I've been mostly unimpressed ever since.
Not impressed.
These movies, especially the fourth entry, are very much written to be witty, but every single piece of dialogue that comes out of almost every single character's mouth sounds completely forced. It's like they are putting inside jokes into a movie that nobody really understands or gives a about. And even the dialogue you actually end up making sense of sounds awkward in its delivery. One of the new Expendable characters, and I don't really know his name because it doesn't really matter, but most of his dialogue consists of weird sexual innuendos that all culminate in his apparent love of golden showers. Why they thought that would be funny or make this character even remotely interesting or appealing, I'll never understand. And if you're thinking to yourself, well, at least we get to see some new action icons that we haven't seen before added to the mix. Nope, they don't do that either. The one fun thing about this franchise and the concept that it was built on is almost completely abandoned in the fourth entry.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
And instead of Arnold Schwarzenegger and Bruce Willis, we have Megan Fox and 50 Cent. Whoever made the decision to make Megan Fox an Expendable and a predominant expendable in this film, the same Megan Fox who isn't believable in the slightest as a soldier and typically only exists in movies just to be eye candy, that person shouldn't be making casting decisions on films anymore. It was like adding Kim Kardashian to the Avengers. It might sound fun to somebody on paper, but in the end, it actually ends up insulting your audience's intelligence and makes us all wonder why we made the decision to buy a ticket to a movie that makes these kind of decisions. As far as 50 Cent goes, I'm a fan of the guy, but I have no idea why he's in this movie. The only good thing to come out of him being involved is he actually says that makes sense at one point during the film, which felt like my own personal channel Easter egg.
That makes sense.
Can I talk about the action for a second? Because for a franchise that is supposed to be balls to the wall action, there were actually 0 memorable action sequences in this film to speak of. In fact, most of them are awkwardly edited and look completely inauthentic. Mostly because they are shot in front of a very obvious green screen, complete with really bad CGI explosions and blood. A surefire way to make me not give a about anything that I'm watching. This next point is going to kind of dip into spoiler territory, but I don't really care, and you shouldn't either, because this movie isn't really worth caring about in any capacity, trust me.
You have that luxury. You have the luxury of not knowing what I know.
Sylvester Stallone is somewhat surprisingly barely in this movie, which may come as a shock to people who are showing up just to see him because he is the star of this franchise. And the trailers are pretty misleading in that aspect. This movie is very much Lee Christmas's story, and I use that term story very loosely. Listen, you all know that I'm thrilled anytime I get to see more of Jason Statham in a film. I actually think he's the most underutilized action star in the past 20 years. But my guy can't catch a break as far as being given the shittiest material to work with. It feels like Guy Ritchie is the only director that's been able to properly utilize Jason Statham, and it's a damn shame because Jason Statham deserves better, and we all deserve better.
Anybody care about what I want?
I do.
Shut up. Get out.
The villains in this film are about as forgettable as can be. Even the surprise reveal at the end of the film as to who the big bad is was completely predictable and underwhelming. I mean, Expendables 3 sucked ass, but at least it had Mel Gibson as the villain. You couldn't get a predominant action star from the past that we haven't seen yet to fill that role in Expendables 4? Or maybe it's that anyone they approached who was worth a damn knew that this movie was going to be garbage? So the filmmakers just basically settled for the first person who actually said yes?
You don't pick me, you're stuck with me.
And that's really what it comes down to. All the decisions made in this film, and the decision to make it in the first place, feels like the filmmakers are just settling for less. Bottom line, this is a franchise that is way past its expiration date, and the apparent lack of given while making this film is the nail in the coffin that the franchise desperately needed. I'm sorry, but there is literally 0 reason to watch this movie. It's pretty much a waste of everyone's time. I think the writing was on the wall after Expendables 3, and I think Sly should have recognized that and probably just let it go.
Nothing is over! Nothing! You just don't turn it off!
I'll always have love for my action icons, but I have no desire to see them relegated to something that reminds me of a cheap, made-for-TV action movie. To me, The Expendables 4 caps off one of Hollywood's biggest missed opportunities, and that's why I'm going to give it the Disgusted Ian Malcolm.
That is one big pile of shit.
Y'all be cool. Nah.